Hi everybody, welcome to the land of low friction. Thanks for coming back. And today we have an episode on me trying to give you a bit of a guide as to your best lubricant choice. So this is something that is coming through a little bit more frequently now into my inbox because over time as testing continues and I keep finding more great products, and so then I'm stocking and recommending some more great products. People that are looking to try to get their lovely new bike or their bike onto a great low friction path, and they're really so I guess loving and trusting the wonderful data and testing of zero friction cycling to get them onto something super low friction and wear. But then they see all these options and they get a bit stuck. It's like, which is the one for me? So that is becoming more of an issue as I get more products up and going from discovering more great products. So now I am working on a lubricant choice matrix, which may or may not be up at the time of this video, but I will try. I just got to really get that set out in the right way so that it's not adding more confusion and actually helping bring clarity. So, and I'm going to apologize to all the there are going to be a whole bunch of other great products out there on the market that obviously I haven't tested. The testing that I do takes ages. It's really exhaustive. So a lot of the tests, especially if it's a decent lubricant, are going for sort of 6,000 kilometers in the main test, and then we can be doing anywhere up to another sort of 4,000 kilometers of single application longevity testing for that lubricant. So there can be anywhere around sort of 10,000 kilometers of testing just to do sort of one test run for a particular lubricant to really put it through all the paces. And that just, even with obviously a machine, that it takes time. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of intervention needed to obviously re-lubricate the chains, adding contamination at a whole bunch of intervals, check measuring, all that sort of stuff, and then resetting test machines post one test to get going on another. So it takes a long time to get through the lubricant tests. And so I can't just sort of run through, like if you remember the sort of friction facts days, Jason Smith was able to pump out a graph of like 55 lubricants in relatively short order because the tests are 5 minutes. Yes, there's work he had to do to prep them and recalibrate machine and so on, but it's not, each test is not going for sort of 10,000 kilometers. So yeah, it just flat out takes time, and testing's really book solid. So a lot of manufacturers are, sort of always looking to book in. There's just not, if you're a manufacturer and you've got a genuinely great product that you've put a lot of time and resources and so on into, and you believe it's something that should be absolutely outstanding on the market, or a product leader on the market, and you want to get that independently verified as opposed to just you going to market saying it's amazing like 1,000 others are doing, then really sort of at the moment I think zero friction cycling is pretty much it. I don't think there's another credible independent test facility actually putting anything out at the moment. So so just super booked and booked for sort of the foreseeable future by a bunch of manufacturers. So there's a lot of stuff. If a manufacturer hasn't booked in with me, I'm just sort of not getting to just randomly test other stuff to see if it's any good or not. So if you're a manufacturer and you're sort of feeling slighted that you haven't been highlighted here today, I just either weren't aware of you, your product hasn't been highlighted to me, or it has and I haven't got to it. And to get to it, you may need to book in. Because I don't know when it will be otherwise. So, but yeah, email me anyway if you're feeling that you're missing out, and we'll see what we can do. All right. So that being said, what we've got really on the front row here at the moment are basically our sort of top products that we've found through testing. Some of them are pretty new. So Revo Lubes and Rex Black Diamond were added earlier this year. Effetto Mariposa Flower Power Wax. I'm going to be talking a bit more about that. That's the latest official edition at the time of recording this. It's still undergoing the single application longevity testing, so I don't have the full results on that for the lubricant yet. But we have completed the main test, and it was amazing. And Session Components, their Graphene S-Wax, is also just wrapping up the main test at the moment, and that has also gone very, very well. So I'll probably be in talks with Session as well as to whether or not I've got a sort of spot for it in the lineup. But this is the number one stuff. So now I'm going to be stepping through bit by bit what to consider for what's right for you, depending on what your cycling is. But if you're stressing about what to do, at the end of the day, if you choose any of these as your path to low friction, with the exception of I don't recommend, and I'll explain more why, and I've got some wonderful data for you because data rocks, why wet lubes and off-road is just generally not the best way to go because dust sticks to wet lubes. But especially if you're a road cyclist, if you're road cycling really, any of this, you're going to be really, really happy. If you're off-road cycling, pretty much just stick with something that's not wet. Any of the non-wet, and you're going to be super duper happy with a couple of little exceptions. Right, so let's go through, rather than I could go lube by lube, but it would be really a lot of ins and outs going that lube for this type of cycling, not that, and ins and outs. So I'm just going to go by demographic. So let's talk about road cycling. So the first question to ask is, does immersive waxing interest you or not interest you? So it's been really fun from, we're doing zero friction cycling. When I started, really, I think immersive waxing was really niche. And now immersive waxing is really not so niche. It's really becoming a lot more mainstream. And that's great. So if you're unsure or you want to know more about immersive waxing, so don't bog it down here, check out, I believe it was episode 17, which is my concise version of immersive waxing, and you can see how easy immersive waxing really is. There's a big myth that's perpetuated by just so many places that immersive waxing is really time consuming and faffy and has all these steps, and that the difference or the benefit that it gives to you is not that much, that you don't need to worry about this whole slow cooker or crock pot thing. The reality is, yes, you need a slow cooker or a crock pot, but the actual immersive waxing process, it is super easy. For the time you spend doing the immersive wax, which is really not very much, the offset of that is you don't have any cleaning maintenance time, basically at all or ever. And the difference in wear rates versus just likely what you're running at the moment, if you're just using something that's been recommended to you from your bike store, or that you've just chosen online from somewhere, from a major online store, the difference is often, it's a lot. Typically, the immersive waxing will give you chain and component longevity around 2 to 3 times longer. Can be a lot more than that if you're on not a great lubricant choice. So that's not a small amount. Cost of components is really, really high for a lot of group sets. Halving that or cutting that into 1/3 or 1/5, that's not a small difference. So when places are saying, look, it's a whole lot of faff and not much more benefit, who wants to save a watt on your chain? It's not that at all. Too often the focus is on, will this lubricant be 1 watt faster than that lubricant in a race? That's not the main focus of ZFC at all. Yes, we do a lot of obviously race stuff, but the main focus is what is going to be day in, day out, the lowest friction and wear, and therefore cost for the vast majority of cyclists for their day in, day out cycling. So in that case, if someone's sort of banging on about, hey, it's not that much difference, who cares about a watt in your chain? It is not that at all, versus your average sort of, what I would say, your average drip lube chain. So if you're using something Finish Line or Mark Off or whatnot from your local bike store, the average difference day in, day out between running those lubricants in your cycling versus an immersive wax is more likely to be an easy 5 watts. Could well be more. Maybe it's only as much as 3. Even if it's only 3, that's basically 3 watts of energy every single pedal stroke that's going into pushing you forwards further, as opposed to 3 watts of energy every single pedal stroke going in directly into eating through your chain and drivetrain components faster. So I guess weigh up which advice you think is better or more accurate advice. So if it was really faffy and not worth it, believe me, I would tell you. There's so much other great stuff to recommend. It doesn't have to be immersive waxing. But so check out episode 17. If immersive waxing, if after watching that you think, that's a whole lot easier than I thought, then and that might be for you, then you ripper. Immersive waxing is king. Basically, every time you put the chain into your wax pot and re-wax it, whatever small amount of contamination has managed to get into the chain is basically reset. So it's just recoated with another solid, super slippery coating of wax. It's a true solid. chain lubricant, so it has the lowest contamination gathering that there is, and the testing just backs that up. So the testing results for the two top immersive waxes that we tested are number 1 and 2. They just can't be beaten. Along the same lines, if immersive waxing is for you, but you're not sure about re-waxing every time, then a really popular approach these days is we have a number of lubricants that are designed or work extremely well directly with immersive waxing, which are Silka SS Drip, which was really made to be used with immersive waxing, obviously made for hot melt, but works just as brilliantly with M-Speed wax. UFO Drip and True Tension Tungsten All Weather, they have all have basically, although these are sort of secret, don't know for sure, but we believe all the sort of similar super refined paraffin base. You can just wax, re-lube the next sort of 5 re-lubricants with any one of these 3, and then just re-wax, and you do not have to do any cleaning of your chain to remove this lubricant before putting the chain into your wax pot. So for those that aren't sure about re-waxing or staying on top of waxing every time, then the immersive wax plus wax compatible drip lubricant approach in combination, that's your next best option, and that's super easy to do. And again, everything just stays so clean. So the beauty is that every time the chain comes out of the wax pot, it just looks brand new, and you haven't had to get out the degreaser. So now, if that is not for you, then for road cycling, as to which option is better between, say, the top wax lubricants and the top known wet lubricants, really, again, this is where you can't go wrong if you're road cycling. So your top wax lubricants there are all amazing. They deliver you super low wear, and as long as you don't over apply them, which this is true for pretty much all lubricants, if you don't over apply them, you apply them when they start to feel a little bit dry, and after applying and working in as per the manufacturer instructions and thoroughly wiping off the excess, things remain really clean for these lubricants for a very long stretch. So really any of these, it's which path you want to go. So there are some advantages to wet lubricants in terms of treatment longevity over the wax lubricants, which tend to be have a slightly shorter treatment longevity, or can be quite a big difference. So the treatment longevity between, say, these 3 versus like a Rex Black Diamond and a Synergetic and Revolubes is quite substantial. So for those that like to just apply a wet lubricant and go for ages and ages and ages before they need to reapply, and we're talking pretty much really minimally sort of around sort of 800 kilometers for these to well over 1,000 kilometers for the Rex Black Diamond per treatment. So that's a long stretch, and that can really suit some cyclists who just want to be able to add a great, really low friction, proven low friction, low wear lubricant and go for ages and ages between treatments. Whereas others are really happy to stick with the wax lubricants. So in short, road cycling, especially if it's dry road cycling, you cannot go wrong in this front row. It is just super happy days. All right, what about in the, I'm going to skip wet road for the moment, despite putting that in the next order in my notes, because I think it's going to make more sense actually if I go to off-road. All right, so off-road, I'm just going to talk about dry off-road for the moment. Kind of gets a little bit easier. Overall, I've got some super great data here to back this up. And I've covered this in key learnings and some other stuff, depending on what you may have seen. But wet lubricants and off-road is basically, that's just a complete and utter mismatch. And hopefully when you think about it, it kind of makes sort of pretty obvious and intuitive sense that wet lubricants and the world of dust is going to be a complete mismatch. Basically, the dust sticks on contact to a wet lubricant, and there's not really any sort of kind of getting around that. So the best approach for, I guess, the top wet lubricants that we've tested, and it's all pretty much got a similar approach, is that they, provide such outstanding lubrication with so little product needed that the chain is much less wet than a lot of other products. So, the amount that you need to put on with this lubricant and how long it lasts is very different to what the experience is. Say this is a recent lubricant or relatively recent wet lubricant release aimed pretty directly, I think, at the off-road market, which is the Wolftooth WT1. Claims to have a detergent in it so that it cleans as it lubricates. It's like a lot of other wet lubricants. It's quite wet, and it just becomes a grinding paste mess in very short order in the world of dirt and dust. So its wear rate, for instance, in the contamination block 2, dry contamination block 2 testing in the ZSC test was, I'll have the graph come up here of some wet versus dry lubricants in the that dry contamination block. So we can see, I'll actually start from the left. So the average of all drip lubricants in the dry contamination block, you can see there in blue, is 24.3%. And we can see that I'll skip across to the red bar graph. That is the average wear rate in block 2 of the wax-based lubricants. So that's 12.3% versus the average of all lubricants tested at 24.3%. And then if we look at the light blue column on the further side there, we can see that the average for the wet lubricants, which my data point's missing, but I'll have that come up, that's basically over 48%. So we have our wax lubricants at basically a quarter of the wear rate of the wet lubricants average. So that's a pretty massive difference. And Wolftooth WT1, I don't have that separated on there, but that was 55%, I believe. 55.4. So, it's pretty clear what's happening. Contamination is sticking to the lubricant, it's becoming part of the lubricant. The lubricant becomes more of a grinding paste as opposed to a lovely slippery lubricant. And hopefully that's fairly obvious as to what's happening. And really the key is we want the least wet possible. A good way to highlight that really is, for those of you that have seen the video on where I sort of demonstrate the zero friction cycling test and where I'm adding the contamination. So I demonstrate where I add the 5 grams of dry contamination, which is the 5 grams of graded sandy loam being drizzled onto the chain from a little control release nozzle. And the average wear rate, so in the dry contamination block, is 24.3%. Now in the wet contamination block, I'm doing the exact same thing, except I have sprayed the chain prior to doing that with 500 ml of water from a going to control pressure spray. So I discovered when I was sort of doing all the testing before I actually locked in the test protocol, initially I thought that I was going to need to figure out how to squirt a wet contamination mix. And that was going to be a little bit of a challenge because preventing nozzles from clogging is actually pretty tricky unless it's really high pressure. Really high pressure is not that indicative of what might be happening out in the real world. So I was a bit worried I thought this might be a little bit of a technical challenge, and so why don't I just try and see what happens with spraying the water on and then adding the contamination. Does that show a fairly tangible difference in versus when I just apply the dry contamination? And it showed up pretty massively. So the wear rate in the wet contamination block is well over double the wear rate in the dry contamination block. And I'm doing the exact same thing with the contamination. All I've done before is sprayed the chain with water. So literally just the chain being wet without the contamination needing to be part of what I'm spraying on. It just shows very, very clearly what sort of goes on once we start to get wet plus contamination. And what that shows though, so why does it make such a difference is basically, even though I haven't had to apply them at the same time, is that when the chain is wet, obviously a lot is sticking and there's a pathway for the contamination to move from outside the chain to inside the chain. If the chain is dry and you've got dust that's stuck on the outside of the chain from the static electricity of the chain whizzing through the air, there's no pathway for that dust really to move from sticking to the outside of a plate to getting in deep inside the chain to the pin where it's going to cause wear. How does it sort of migrate from out to in? So, and that carries over directly to your wet lubricant. So the wetter it is, the more contamination is going to stick, and the more it's going to have a great pathway to get outside to inside where it causes wear. And that is just shown time and time again. You can go through the test results on the Zero Friction Cycling lubricant test page, and you just look at the really sort of the wet lubricants and their wear rates in the dry dust contamination block versus the wax and much more dry lubricants. It's just, they are poles and poles apart. So yeah, a lubricant like this, it doesn't matter that it's got a cleaning agent in. What's that doing? It's actively attracting a ton of contamination that it's then supposed to be cleaning. It's completely and utterly flawed approach. It's been proven time and time again, not just by me, that is a completely flawed approach. So you need something that is the least wet. So that lovely rambling, nerdy little session segue aside, the only wet lubricant that I'm really going to actively recommend if you ride off-road and wax lubricants just aren't your thing because you like the feel of a wet lubricant more, you find the treatment lifespan for wax lubricants off-road not to be long enough for you, then Rex Black Diamond. So that has come out by far with the lowest wear rate in the dry contamination block 2. Rex Black Diamond was, I believe it was 11.1%. And I think we've got Synergetic and Revo Lubes were basically pretty close at, I think, 18.3 and 18.6%. And they are by far the best wet lubricants tested in dry contamination. It just, beyond these three, any other wet lubricants tested, the wear rates shoot up pretty dramatically. So they are really, if you must run a wet lube, it's these three. And of those three, then Black Diamond has really proven the standout. You know, that's a very low wear rate still in that contamination block. So dry off-roading, for the love of your components and wallet, really from here onwards is your call. All of these are super low wear in the dry contamination block. The contamination really is resisted and doesn't get in. Alrighty, wet. So I'm going to cover sort of wet road cycling and wet off-road cycling. Now, yes, there is a difference. So wet off-road is a lot harsher than wet road, but still the key takeaway is the same. So what is the best lubricant choice for you? It's actually less about, I guess, the lubricant that you're running at the time. As long as that lubricant choice is going to get you through your wet ride without the treatment lifespan completely giving up and having you running without any actual lubricant, just water and grit. As long as the treatment lifespan of the lubricant is fine for the length of wet ride or wet race that you're going to do, and you're using a good lubricant choice, it's a lot less. So what's the lubricant for you for your cycling in those conditions? It's a lot less about the actual lubricant itself for that ride or event. It's really going to be about what lubricant is for you the easiest to reset after your wet cycling. So, water, as I was sort of mentioning before, that's the great transport system to get the contamination from outside the chain to deep inside the chain where it's going to cause wear and damage. Disregard any claims that a lubricant says that it has this high pressure film strength or amazing high pressure membrane or performance, that it is able to prevent contamination from abrading on the metal. It is not. The great lubricants are able to have a high pressure film strength or membrane that is absolutely able to prevent metal on metal contact and wear, because the lubricant does hold up and keep those parts separate, and it's just running on the lubricant, which is why, especially we had Synergetic recorded 0% wear rate in the first 1,000 kilometer test block, which is the only one so far of a drip lubricant to record a 0% wear rate, and a number of these other top lubricants are down at 2%, which is just so low. So yes, they do that, but the pressures inside your chain are so high because although we don't put out loads like say an engine, but the parts in the chain are really small. So the pressure loads are super high. We can talk into thousands of PSI high. Once you've got particles of grit, they will get pressed through whatever you're running, whatever you are deciding to use. It's not going to stop the contamination that gets in from abrading on the metal and causing wear. So just understand, riding out there in the wet, chain lubrication, your bicycle chain lubrication, it seems like a pretty humble part, but it's a really extreme lubrication challenge. There's really not a lot of other, sort of lubrication challenges in pretty much anything where, you've got really high pressure loads and just the lubricant and the component are completely exposed to getting doused with, abrasive contamination. If this was happening in your engine or whatnot, things would go to pieces pretty quickly. A lot of people sort of think, could ride a lot in the wet and just drip more on and it's all good. But understand the challenge that if you do that, with wet cycling and chain lubrication, I covered this in the key learnings a bit, but you're going to pay the piper in one of two ways. You're going to pay the piper in giving the chain a bit of attention and maintenance post-wet ride, or you're going to pay the piper with some high friction and wear. Even if your next rides after that wet ride are in the sun, you've still got all that abrasive contamination in there. Even if you've applied more lube over the top, it's still in there and it's being pressed through that lube and abrading on your chain metal. So it really does come down to what is the easiest option for you, lubricant choice wise, to reset the contamination post your wet cycling. And that becomes more and more so, like if you only ride very infrequently in the wet, so you get caught in the occasional, sort of rainy wet ride, then really anything is going to be okay. It's not going to be that hard for you, I don't think, to reset contamination post ride, via whichever method suits you best to clean your chain. I'm going to be releasing a chain maintenance guide soon as well. But resetting that and going with a fresh coating, you ripper. If you ride all the time in the wet though, it can become really quite a challenge. So, what do you do? What's the right option? All right, so once again, in mine and Zero Friction Cycling's official opinion, there's still nothing easier than immersive waxing. The more you need to reset chain contamination, the easier immersive waxing is versus basically any other option, because you pop your chain into the wax pot, the old coating melts off, you swish it and you have a new coating on and away you go. Now, yes, over time, you're bringing contamination into your wax pot, so there is more contamination in the wax and the wax becomes less amazing. It will become more abrasive over time. However, for those that are just sort of adding more lubricant, the maths are just so much in favor of the immersive waxing. In general, with a lubricant, you are adding sort of somewhere between, it varies a bit based on the lubricant, maybe like for something like this, you're adding like 1 mil. For something like this, you might be adding 8 mil. For SS drip or these, you might be adding 2 or 3 mil. Let's call it 5 mil of lubricant, like pretty heavy application of re-lube post-wet ride. You're adding 5 mil of lubricant over a chain which is going to be more than 100 links long. Most chains are around 104 to 112 links, depending on a few things. So 5 mil, even let's call it a 100 link long chain, that is going to be 0.05 of a mil per link that you have added of fresh lubricant onto your chain. So 0.05 of a mil per link that you've got new stuff that's going in on top of the old stuff, as opposed to putting a chain into a bath of basically 500 mil of lubricant. So it takes a long time for the contamination in your wax pot to approach anything remotely like what is happening with your chain to contamination ratio if you are just adding lubricant back on top of your chain that has just seen some harsh wet conditions. So the easiest to keep things really low friction is to pop the chain off, put it in a pot of wax again. If you're waxing, nothing is easier. Your next best is to, as per the other one, is to, I guess, be using immersive waxing in conjunction with wax compatible drip lubricants. If doing that each time post wet ride is not feasible, wax, apply the lubricant, if you need to top up for the next ride or two, knowing that that's going to have a bit of a penalty obviously with your friction and wear, and then re-wax when it's practical for you to do so to reset that contamination. So those two are your easiest. If immersive waxing is off the table and it's just not you, and that's certainly not going to be everybody, then again, whether you're using the wax lubricants or your wet lubricants, some of them are easier than others to reset. So for instance, this one and this one and this one, so these three again, being the more refined or the wax type they use being a sort of a paraffin base, you can actually do a pretty impressive reset just with boiling water. And the same goes for if you are immersive waxing and you've done a really sort of, full mutter, or really quite a bad off-road ride. There's a whole lot of contamination. I'll have a picture up actually of my mountain bike post, a mountain bike race I had a couple of weeks ago, and it really hosed down on the last sort of 8 odd K lap, and things got pretty dirty just after even just that last lap. And have a look at that chain and see all the stuff that's on it. So, this is with I guess, your best sort of lubricant options, obviously, that I run in the world that we know, and you can see how much stuff is on the chain. Now, it always amazes me that people finish a race or a ride like that, and they come home and they just add some lube so the chain doesn't rust, and then they just continue riding. I mean, there's just so much abrasive stuff that's going to just have such a merry time with the inside of your chain, and what that's going to do for your chain wear and component wear. Really, something needs to be done. So now for me, for immersive waxing or these wax lubricants, I can actually do a great flush clean initially with just doing some boiling water flush rinse cleans, because I'm going to melt off the bulk of the contaminated wax, and that's going to flush out most of the abrasive contamination. And that just means that I'm bringing a lot less crap into my wax pot post such a ride versus if I just put it straight into the pot. So my wax is going to stay amazing for a lot longer. Or if I'm not waxing, I'm just going to be applying my drip lube back over after I've properly dried the chain, back over a chain that has so much less stuff that I'm putting my lubricant back over the top of. If it's not a lubricant that you can sort of do a great job of melting the old contaminated product off, so for instance, this is sunflower based wax. This is I don't know how to say it properly, canuba wax from Brazil. So they're not going to just sort of melt off. So you're going to need a solvent that is more specific, that works on wax. It's something like UFO Clean. I think Effetto have their own solvent which works perfectly with those, which I've got to look more into. So it's a matter of then, are you either going to spray that through the chain and remove a feasible amount, or at least reduce, and then reapply. Now, if it's a wet lubricant, again, you're going to need to use something. You can't use water to clean off your wet lubricant and reset. So whether it's a degreaser spray, so Silk New Bio degreaser, or just an automotive degreaser that's pretty cheap, or UFO Clean, or anything. And whether you're doing that on bike or with a clip-on cleaner, clip-on cleaners are okay. I don't think they do anything greatly better than just spraying and working it through the bike. They can make it a little bit easier just to scrub all the crap off the outside. I'm always a proponent of off-bike, because you can just put a lot of volume through the chain and really flush it clean. The clip-on chain cleaners have a really small reservoir, so I can remove a chain, put it in container, put in 250 ml of mineral terps and shake it and get that bath 1 done, and I've put 250 ml through and given it a pretty good flush. I can do that in a pretty short time, and then you can just let the chain dry and then relube. Chain cleaner, you're going to be doing like 10, 15 baths to get the same amount through. So you kind of takes a long time to get anywhere doing that. So, but obviously, hopefully I've sort of covered off a bit in my rambly way that you're going to need to do something. The more you do, the more you flush rinse through these products, obviously the better reset you're going to get, and you're going to have lesser friction and wear on your next rides than if you don't, by quite a lot. But there's going to be a balance on how much does that cleaning product cost and your time, and how much wear rate are you going to save past doing that initial flush. You can keep going, and that's better, but it's like if you put 4 litres through each time, it just may not be feasible. So weigh up a bit, but do something. I can only recommend highly, do something. Get the bulk of the abrasive stuff out, and you will save a ton. Just to cover off, I'm going to do a little bit of data just to finish off on that, just because I love to give you some data. I swear you will just all love it so much too, hopefully. All right, so if we have a look at, a graph should come up here. So from the zero friction cycling testing, block 4 is the wet contamination block, and that is obviously pretty harsh. We see some pretty high wear rates in general through that block. And then for lubricants that make it through that block and still have wear allowance left, then block 5 is no contamination. So it gives we get to see, can the lubricant clear out and reset a bit the contamination that has been brought in by the wet block and deliver something lower. And so really what this will highlight though is what's the difference between, say, that lubricant's performance in block 1 before there's been any contamination introduced. That's really that lubricant's kind of pure performance versus what is it in block 5, which again is a clean contamination block, exactly the same as block 1. It's just that it's coming after the wet block 4. So we're seeing what happens after all that contamination has been introduced. So we can see, so if we have a look at the first bar there, so that's the average wear rate of all the lubricants tested during the wet contamination block 4, which is 55.4%. And then in block 5, sorry, that's drip lubricants, I should say, for that red block. In block 5, we can see the wear rate for those same lubricants is 21.4%. So it's come down. That's great. So adding more lube definitely helps. But when we have a look at the block 1 wear rate for those same lubricants, it's 7%. So the average wear rate for those lubricants tested when things start off nice and clean, their true performance 7%. Once contamination has been introduced, you know, after it's been given a good chance to do its thing, it's at 21.4%. So if you don't do anything post wet rides, on average, you can expect you're going to have 3 times the wear rate or more for that lubricant versus if you reset the contamination. So again, weigh up how much does your group set cost, and are you happy to wear through that 3 times faster than if you do some maintenance post wet ride. The next bar graph we can see there is the average wear rate for the wax lubricants in block 5. So that is these, and that is 2.6%. So that is quite, yes, 2.6% for, that's for, for molten speed wax and hot melt. So that's showing immersive waxing, that just resets things back rather magnificently. The blue graph is the average wear rate in block 5, so post the wet block of wet lubricants, so all the wet lubricants tested. So these do better, but overall 38.2%. So that's quite a bit higher than the average of all lubricants tested at 21.4. And the average wear rate recorded in block 5 post the wet block for the wax lubricants, not including molten speed wax and hot melt, is 23.8. So they're still substantially better overall on average than wet lubricants. So hopefully though that highlights the difference between, you know, what you should do or what happens if you don't take some maintenance to help your chain out after it's just seen so much abrasive stuff brought in, because by and large it just gets landlocked in the lubricant. So there is some flush cleaning obviously by adding new lubrication, but again, as I was saying, we're talking like 0.05, more often less than that, 0.03, 0.02 of a mil per link. There's only so much that can do, and there's no point trying to flush through your clean by adding stacks of actual lubricant as opposed to just doing a clean and then moving on after you've done a reset. So the key takeaway is, what is the best lubricant choice for you if you're riding in wet conditions, especially frequently in wet conditions? It is the lubricant option that is easiest for you to reset the contamination after the wet ride. So less focus on what's actually happening during the wet ride. And if it's going to be tricky, so before I ramble on too much, if it's going to be tricky, if you ride a lot in the wet, so you're a high mileage, avid trainer, racer, really can help a lot to have or consider having 2 chains on rotation. If you're riding a lot in harsh wet conditions, you're always going to need to get another chain sooner or later because the chain's been pretty hammered. So pre-buying your next chain, it doesn't cost you anything, and it basically guarantees that, number one, you're going to get 2 chains through your cassette, and especially if you've got an expensive cassette, that is really, really handy versus having chain one run a bit long and you need to get a new cassette after just your first chain if you got caught out with letting it go too far past the recommended replacement mark. So guaranteeing for a start that you get 2 chains through your cassette as opposed to 1 is a great idea, and it also helps lower the wear rate on your chain rings, and they can be really expensive as well. The other thing, or the other benefit to it, is that it can make it a whole lot easier for you to stay on top of some maintenance that's going to reset that. So you do a wet ride, you come home, you got stuff to do, family, work, play, all that stuff, and now's not a great time to try to reset your chain. That's cool. Just, do something with the chain. You might need to just quickly top a coating on it so it doesn't rust. You might want to remove the chain and wrap it in a microfiber cloth so that it's protected from oxidizing. Never use a plastic bag. Plastic bags are like a humidifier and a rust catalyst. So if you're removing your chain to store it for a day or a week until you can reset the contamination post-wet ride, then wipe it dry with a microfiber cloth and then just wrap it in a microfiber cloth and store it, and then it will be fine for a darn good stretch. But it can just make it a whole lot easier. So you've done a wet ride, you should reset your chain, or you're going to pay for that in a lot of friction and wear on your next rides. If you've got a second chain, you can pop that one off, wrap it up, pop your next chain on, and you're ready to go. And then it gives you more leeway to then get to the other chain when you've got a spare spot. And then that one's ready to go so that when this one sees some wet weather, you can take that one off. And then move to your second chain that's ready to go. It can just make it so much easier, especially if you're fairly high volume. So that's going to be the hot tip there if you are high mileage or fairly frequent intrepid cyclist. All right, so I don't know if after all that I've entirely cleared up what should be your lubrication choice, but hopefully it helps a bit. Lastly, I get more and more inquiries these days about I'm waxing, which is awesome, or I'm considering waxing, which is awesome, but I'm going on a bike packing trip or a cycling holiday, or I've got a stage race, and obviously taking my slow cooker with me is not super feasible. What do I do? That's super, super simple. Again, pretty much same as we were saying about one of the top options is to use immersive waxing in conjunction with the wax-compatible drip lubes. You just use one of the wax-compatible drip lubes. All you need to do is take one of those with you, apply it just as per their instructions to apply the lubricant, and when you come home, you can just re-wax without needing to do any cleaning because they're completely compatible with waxing with the immersive waxes. So SS drip, UFO drip, and True Tension Tungsten all weather, they are your, sort of proven, completely compatible with immersive waxing. All is awesome. Latest kids on the block, so the Flower Power Wax and S-Wax, as yet I don't know. I'm field testing a bunch of stuff all the time, so it's quite hard for me to get through field testing a lot where I'm using, say, a drip lube for X number of lubricants and then re-waxing in either M-Speed wax or hot melt, and seeing over time is there any negative impact to how the wax adheres and things like that. So that actually takes a bit of time, and and the manufacturers don't really know either because it's not their brief when they created the product to make it compatible with M-Speed wax or hot melt wax. They are a different wax base, like completely different wax base to what's used in these two. So I don't know yet. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but that'll be known. But in short, just use, if you're waxing and you're going on a trip, then just use these. So that's really super easy. And I'm just going to give a quick, shout out just to finish off. So, because I did say I was going to talk a little bit more about this one. So this one at the moment, so this is by Effetto Mariposa. They've got a new sunflower wax, which we're still testing at the moment, but it has been through the main test. And this has actually set a new record low wear rate for a drip lube through the main test, coming in at only just over 80% total wear rate across the full 6,000 kilometre test block, which includes dry contamination test, wet and extreme. So that is super duper impressive. So I'm going to be looking to hopefully by the time this video comes out have that stocking. So and it's quite long lasting. So it's not as clean as this really sort of different refined paraffin base wax lubricants. it is a bit sort of blacker and does stay a bit more sort of almost, it is more like a, closer towards sort of a smooth and squirt, but it's really long lasting per treatment, and it's just so low wear. So although not quite as clean, it's a super product. So I'm really excited to be stocking that, and it's touting some super environmentally friendly credentials as well. It's probably going to be one of, if not, I guess competing as like the most environmentally friendly drip lubricant. This one going super well. This had some penetration issues similar to, not as bad as, but similar to the penetration issues that we've seen with Squirt, Smooth and Grax. And so they're working on that. So it's basically its worst wear rate for a fair bit was block 1, which is indicative of having penetration issues. And then it got a lot better. It was amazing in block 2, great in block 3, really strong in block 4 for the wet conditions. So overall, great product, and they're sort of taking that data away and they're working on resolving the initial penetration issues because these products here, this does have it a bit as well, unfortunately. So I'll talk about why that comes into play for lubricants because it does link to resetting the contamination. These 3 don't have any penetration issues. Obviously, your wet lubricants don't have any penetration issues. So if you do have a penetration issue, it's not optimal because if you need to reset contamination, it's just then a lot of faff to negate that. So they understand that and they're working on that. And they're going to be sending me an adjusted formula to test. So it's great that they're sort of looking to resolve that, and they believe they've got a fix for that, which is going to be exciting to see. Aside from that, if you negate the penetration issues, that's also going to be a brilliant product. So I'm going to be having a strong look at that. Now, last rambling bit to finish. So links to the resetting of the contamination. Now, if you only ride in the dry road, dry off road, so products like say Smooth, Squirt, Grax, they got pretty strong dry contamination resistance because they're a wax-based lube. That's kind of their forte, or what they're sort of designed to do. So that's fine in that you don't really need to do much periodic maintenance when you're only riding in the dry. But if you ride in the wet, so the contamination gets pressed into that wax and it's effectively landlocked. And yes, adding more helps, but what's in there is not going anywhere. It's going to keep on abrading on your chain. So they can be, so for Squirt and Smooth especially, they can be a tougher clean than others. They need a pretty strong solvent. And post the clean, if you just got a whole lot more faff to do to try to negate the penetration issue, and if you don't negate the penetration issue, you really do have a bit of high wear to start with, because it just takes them, they really struggle to get through the tiny little gap between the inner plate shoulders, which is beneath the roller, to get to the pin and disseminate across the pin. I've got that covered somewhere on my website. So they just struggle a lot with that. And so, because when we've tested Squirt and Smooth for that 6 ways from Sunday, where it's over and over and over again, their clean block 1 result is basically like 19% wear. And yet if it's applied via Immersive, it drops all the way down to 4.5%. And if we try to negate it, so we do stuff like we heat up the lubricant to like 30, 35 degrees, heat up the chain with a hairdryer or a heat gun, and just do every trick in the book, reworking it in, we can get that down to about 10%. So it's better, but it just really shows they have quite significant penetration issues, which does come with a wear penalty. So if you're riding in the wet a lot, which means you should be resetting your chain contamination a lot, then having to try to negate that penetration issue frequently, it's a real pain in the ass. So going with something that is easy, so it doesn't have the penetration issues if you do ride in the wet, is obviously going to be a great idea. So just be wary. Smooth and Squirt, I still rate them. They're a great lube. Like, they're really cheap, and in general they do a great job. So they're still really popular. And if you only ride in the dry, they can still be a great option, because you pay $15 to $20 odd or $25 for a bottle that's probably going to last you 2 years. That's all groovy, all good. And if you ride in the dry only, they can still be a great option. But just take note that not always or not going to be your best option if you're riding in the wet. So stick with something that when you reset is going to be easy to get in there. I think that will probably do. Hopefully that wasn't too, back and forth, and hopefully made some kind of coherent sense. and give you some sort of guidance into what you may look to run for your option. But really, for most cyclists, anything here, it's a good time. So that's really the main thing that zero friction cycling loves to find through testing, and then be able to put that information out to everyone as to, here's something tested and proven that's awesome, really low wear, and in most times super clean. They're just great options. So can't go wrong. Don't stress too much. Just have a good time. All right, that'll do. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and other YouTubey type things, like share with your friends. So that'll keep you up to date with the latest low friction news and hints and tips. And yeah, also put any comments down below, and I can try to look at those and take them into account for future episodes.